Okay, let's get started then. Welcome everyone for the Salt Office Hours September episode. As you know, you can even send your questions in the office hours at saltstack.com. If in any of the future meetings if you are unable to attend, this is something which folks have requested, and since we will be uploading the recording later to YouTube as well. So please send in your question as in when you get in the chat window of the Zoom as well, and we'd be happy to answer that. So today in the agenda, we have 3-point items. The first up is Thomas Hatch, who needs no introduction. He will actually be giving a demo of Heis, which is the new Salt SSH. The second item is Shane, who's the Windows working group captain. He will be talking about what the Windows working group is up to. And if Wesley, who's the captain of Mac working group, if he's able to join us. Currently, I don't see him online, but if he's able to join us on time, he'll also be talking about the Mac working group. Okay, I do see Wesley joining in.
Yeah, present.
That's awesome.
Hello.
Awesome. Hi, Wesley.
Hello,
so
everyone.
He will, yep. I was just walking through the agenda, Wesley. So yeah, good to see you online. So once I think Tom finishes the demo, then the stage is all yours and Shane's. So post the discussion about the working groups, then we will answer the questions from the community. So let's begin.
Okay. All right, so this has been a little slower coming than I would have hoped, but a couple of months ago we were talking about some ideas to simplify Salt SSH moving forward. And inside of the Salt SSH working group, we've talked a great deal about not only many of the ways in which we are fixing up Salt SSH itself, but also asking some questions about would it make sense for us to have a system that took a slightly different approach to the problem. When we come back and we look at Salt SSH and we look at the history of Salt SSH, a significant amount of the demand and the requests that we get around it are for bootstrapping minions. We've had a number of users and customers come back and say that they want more ephemeral minions and to make upgrading a lot easier. We've had ongoing problems with versions of Python. We've had a lot of people who want to be able to change kind of the directional mantra of Salt, right? Because Salt is all minion to master. They want to be able to reach out from master to minion in a smoother, more consistent way. And so I've been working on something called Heis, and got it in the 1.2 last week. And yeah, it's taken a little longer, not because it's been more complicated than I would have thought, but just because I've had to do more management tasks these last few weeks than fun things. And so let me go over this design really quickly. The idea here is that for Salt SSH, instead of shelling out to SSH and shoving a bunch of data down a pipe, and then only getting a partial functionality out of Salt, the idea is that we create an SSH tunnel so that from the master, we can reach out to a remote system over SSH. We can SFTP over that connection all the necessary files that we need to run a minion. We can then start that minion, but instead of the minion having to independently connect back to the master, the minion can create a tunnel. We can create a tunnel back over that SSH channel. Now this is beneficial in a number of ways. One, we have a completely ephemeral minion, which means that that minion can be potentially cached or not cached. Oh, come on, my alerts are showing up. allow me to destroy my browser so that I don't break the fourth wall again. Sorry. So, yeah, so it makes it so the minion upgrades are completely seamless because the minion is ephemeral. It also makes it so that the minion doesn't technically need to exist on those remote systems. One of the other components of Heis is a completely ephemeral and relocatable portable build of Python. And so I've got that as well, so that we were able to distribute a portable build of Python as well as a portable build of Salt. And these portable builds include compiled binaries, but they are still portable and compatible as far as I've been able to tell so far with my testing, ELF formats inside of the Linux kernel back a very long way. I mean, something like 2.6.2. I don't remember off the top of my head when the kernel modified their ELF format last, but it was a long flipping time ago. Okay. And so how it works is pretty simple and straightforward. We first take a look at, and it doesn't have to be run as root, I'm just being lazy. It is set up in such a way that all of these files can exist and run as a non-root situation. But it follows the roster paradigm. So, and that of course is pluggable, everything's pluggable. And then using that roster paradigm, we're able to set up a basic connection. I'm just, for this demo, since I got to be honest, getting the full tool chain working, I got it working last night. So I am just SSHing to localhost for this. And so I've changed my root password for now. There's a number of just basic features that we're going to need to add in here, like being able to SSH to a remote system with a user other than root, and then sudoing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But for now, it's all about proving out that baseline concept. And so connecting via root with a password that an idiot would have on their luggage. Now, yeah, for those of you who get that joke.
I appreciate it.
Now, the difference with Heis is that what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to initialize a Heis connection. All this Heis connection does is distribute the minion and set up the tunnel. Now, if we take a look at things, as to how all of this is working, let me run Heis-help. So Heis is a completely pluggable system, so that it's really just a system that's all about distributing runtimes in an ephemeral way, using tunnels, and then connecting those runtimes into arbitrary managers. And so it just so happens that the arbitrary manager we're looking at is the salt minion and master, and that's the system that we're addressing. And so first I want to take a look at this concept of artifacts directory. So Heis comes with the ability to have certain artifacts that are distributable. And so, well, there's, not using that one anymore, okay. And so I still need to publish the toolchain for creating this, this standalone install of Python. But then using that standalone install of Python, we distribute a salt minion PEX file. Now the salt minion PEX file gets built against the standalone version of Python so that it's using all of the same headers, et cetera, and it's compatible with that version. One of the problems I ran into is that earlier I was under the impression that Python 3.7 would be Python 3.7 on multiple systems, and that just wasn't the case. And that we're running into odd errors with our PEX files, even though we still were running Python 3.7 on 2 separate operating systems. And so it really came down to, we need to be able to distribute Python with the system. And so you don't need to have really anything other than SSH running on the remote system for this to work. You don't need Python. There's no dependency on Python versions. I haven't tested this back all the way back to RHEL 5, but by all means it should work, but need a little more testing still in place. But so we're able to put our artifacts in the artifacts directory. Then with the artifacts in the artifacts directory, then these get copied into var temp. And into var temp on the remote system, and then on that remote system, they are subsequently unpacked, and then we were able to execute the entire thing under a root inside of var temp, so that the entire execution is completely isolated to a localized area. Now, as you may already again notice, I haven't put cleanup code in yet. I mean, again, one thing at a time. But we need to be able to make it, I need to put in the caching and cleanup code so that we can do things like have version minions and versioned copies of Python, and then we can have situations where we're able to say, are we only going to allow the minion and Python to exist on the system while it's running, and then clean it up every time? Do we want to cache them to speed up reconnections, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? All right. And so now that everything is set up, what's happened is you've probably noticed we haven't run any salt commands yet. We've just got this little Heis guy hanging out here with some print statements I got to clean up and some logs I need to add. But the joy of, again, prototype level. But if I run salt key on the master here, we see that we have an unaccepted key from my laptop here. Because what's happened is that remote minion has been tunneled through ports, in this case, 4405 and 4406. Again, I haven't set up rotating ports yet. It's just, there's a laundry list. Now, and so it is connecting via those local host ports and then back through that SSH tunnel and then connecting back into a master. And so now we've got a salt minion that is running like a normal salt minion. It just happens to be ephemeral and running over an SSH tunnel and doesn't need to have a network firewall path back to the master. And so now it's a full-blown minion. We don't need to do any finagling to get states to work. It's all just in there, right? And so now I can just do a good old test.ping, right? And we're good to go. And yes, I'm terribly embarrassed that I've got a salt master running on Python 2. Sorry about that. This is just a stock install of what is shipping with Arch. But yeah, then we're good to go. And so at this point, again, it's a full-blown minion. Beacons are running. Events are running. The reactor will work. We can run states. There's no restrictions on things like the peer system. It's a full-blown minion. And then when all is said and done, everything inside of that var temp Heis directory can be removed off of the minion, and no harm, no foul. And also the entire runtime is isolated to var temp Heis. All right. This also means that Heis does need to, in this case, continually run as a daemon to keep that open. I'm only demoing against one target right now. Because I just got it working last night. It will certainly support multiple targets. Now, to go over a little more about how this works, under the hood, because we've got the beautiful benefit of being able to use Python 3 for this, everything is using async IO. It's all built on POP, our plugin-oriented programming system, which was fairly recently released. I just released POP version 7. to also add some features to support some of those things we need inside of Heis. For those of you on the call who are not familiar with POP, again, this is a pretty new addition to what we're working on. POP is a system called plugin-oriented programming, and it presents a plugin-oriented approach to application development that is a significant evolution of SALT's own internal plugin system. So again, for those who are not aware of this, after SALT's plugin system a few years ago, I thought, what would it look like if I were to build a plugin system from scratch? And I iterated on that a bunch of times, wrote it in a couple different languages very slowly over the course of about a year and a half until I came up with POP. And so POP gives you this standalone plugin system that solves basically all of the major problems that we run into with SALT's plugin system, and then also solves a number of fundamental programming paradigm and computer science problems, particularly around memory management, memory distribution, namespace, and hierarchical access, distributing information about variable object and location to other software developers. I feel like I've got a pretty strong argument against and how to fulfill the actual goals that are presented by concepts like private and protected variables, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot in that whole POP thing. So since Heis is built on it, everything inside of Heis is a plugin, which makes it really easy, again, to be able to plug this into more scenarios. So this also means that the tunneling system that we're using is a plugin. And so since the tunneling system that we're using is also a plugin, we can very easily change out the tunneling system to use something other than async SSH. And so yes, this system is depending on async SSH, so we only have to make one SSH connection to the remote system, and then everything else is tunneled over it. If you haven't used async SSH yet, it is a dream to use, especially after having used every other way to program over SSH and the never-ending nightmare that is. Like the fact that you have to modify how you even shell out to be able to properly attach to an SSH terminal because of how it does VT emulation, right? I mean, just such a nightmare. But async SSH takes care of that by basically re-implementing SSH in Python, which is pretty slick. And it is entirely based on async IO. And so this also means that we should be able to make significantly more parallel connections to remote systems, significantly faster, because each connection no longer has to maintain the memory around a full SSH connection stack, because the replication of those connections is very elegantly implemented inside of async SSH. I think that kind of covers it. Does that, any questions, comments, arguments, rebuttals? I guess one natural question would be, is this going to supersede SALT SSH? I think it would be really slick if we could get Heis to the point where it could supersede SALT SSH as a more elegant solution to the problem. Of course, before we would do something like formally shut down SALT SSH, we would make sure that we have sufficient community feedback and a good solid understanding as to what that impact would be. We would also not want to do it until we felt that there was sufficient compatibility with existing SALT SSH rosters inside of Heis. And we also want to make it so that Heis is able to spin up and spin down completely ephemeral SALT masters. Because right now, Heis is using everything to connect to an existing SALT master, but SALT SSH is a one-and-done, single-pass solution, right? And so it would make a lot of sense for us to be able to have a single command that would create those SSH connections, but also asynchronously, while creating those SSH connections, also stand up a SALT master. and that command would then be able to get that full communication throughput, auto accept keys on the master, and automatically start sending commands out over those pipelines. My estimation also around performance curves is that Heis will be slower for less than between about 10 to 20 minions, but then significantly faster after that than Salt SSH. And again, scale much, much better. Okay, so yeah, questions, comments, arguments, rebuttals.
What about, so for Windows, if we're gonna do this on Windows, did you create like a WinRM plugin? Is that what you're thinking, or use built-in SSH on the newer versions?
Well, so that's a question that would still need to be explored. Where we're at right now is that, yeah, we could very easily use SSH on Windows now, because, that's happened. But with that said, let me open this up a little. So if I look at Heis, and I get a little echo, okay. It's built from a number of plugin systems. And so Heis is the plugin system that has managers in it. And so if we open up Salt Master, then we see that we just have to implement an interface, a couple of functions in here, basically run and single. And these are all then connecting back into the Tunnel plugin system. And so what that means from an implementation perspective is that if we come back and we look at the Tunnel plugin system, all we need to do is, there's my road print statement. All we need to do is implement these functions. And if we have a system that can implement these functions over WinRM, then it would make sense to implement it over WinRM and over SSH, so that both options are then presented. And again, just to cover my bases here, so this is using async SSH, and oh my goodness, look at how incredibly easy this is. They already support virtually every type of authentication medium that can happen in SSH. They already support all of the nuances of different SSH versions. All I've got to do to support different login capabilities here is just add them to this connect function. It's just a dream come true. And then to send, it's, oh wow, 2 lines. To get a file, 2 lines. To run a remote command, 2 lines. And to build an actual reverse tunnel, 2 lines. Async SSH is just one of the most beautiful things ever. So yeah, that's all that boils down to. But the other thing is that under Heis, where we create managers, there's absolutely no reason why we wouldn't be able to create, again, virtually any type of ephemeral agent system you can imagine inside of Heis. All you'd need to do is make a new manager, make sure that you're configured to use that specific manager when you're in Heis, and bam, you're done. You're there. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions? There's probably a comment thing on the.
I've got the chat up.
Oh, we've got nothing in the chat. Okay. I think it was a pain in the neck was figuring out how to make a portable version of Python. Yeah, you've got to build Python in its entire toolkit and make sure that it all has internal static linking, and then make sure that it's compiled in such a way that the you know, that the target binaries have a certain level of compatibility and optimization and blah, 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 blah. That took forever. Okay, unless there are any questions, and I'm not seeing anything pop up in chat. This code isn't, I haven't pushed this out into the open yet, just because I've iterated on components of the concept like 5 times now. And so this will get published out. Right now, I'm still manually building those artifacts. And so my plan is to fix it so that the building of those artifacts is no longer manual, and then write a pile of documentation, and then release Heis. And so this is something that you're going to be seeing here pretty soon. And there's also a fair amount of error checking I've got to get built in. So at this point, I feel like the really difficult conceptual stuff is taken care of, and I just need to polish some of the edges and get this thing out the door so that everybody can start playing around with it and taking a look at it. If people are interested in POP, which Heis again is built on, and that I'm building more and more stuff on moving forward, POP is definitely open, Apache licensed. It does have documentation out there. I think the documentation for how new POP is pretty good. As always, I'm open to feedback there. But I would definitely encourage people to take a look at POP, as this is a system that allows us to have a really fantastic kind of compartmentalization inside of the SALT ecosystem moving forward. And in and of itself, I've been surprised how often, POP in a nutshell, usually what happens is I show it to people and they get all angry with me for making what is effectively a programming paradigm. And not using classes more and things like that. And then I talk to them about it and help them understand where we're going, and they go, that makes a lot of sense. This is not something that I just decided to cook up in an afternoon. I have spent literally 4 years developing this concept. So I would generally argue it's pretty well thought out. There's a lot that still needs to be added to it, but it is very, very functional. So yeah, I would definitely encourage people to take a look at POP.
We did have a question come in. Damon says, will you be packaging Python 3 for all platforms, normal SALT?
Okay, so to have these relocatable Python binaries, yes, we need to be able to package those so that they will run on multiple platforms. Right now, I've only built it out for Linux, but the system that I've got in place should work just fine with only a few modifications for Windows and Mac OS. And it is derived from someone else who has done most of the work around building a portable Python. And so right now, I've got a 64-bit Python 3.7.4. I should say a 64-bit Python 3. Of course, if you build more than Python 3, that'd be ridiculous. But yeah, we're definitely going to be pumping these things out for Windows and Mac OS at least. And we'll see about also getting them out for the platforms like AX and Solaris. Sorry, I'm being recorded. I shouldn't make fun of things. I've got a bad habit of having nicknames for virtually every platform, Linux, Windows, and everything else. But yeah, we'll have full platform support. Okay, I'm happy to pass the torch.
So Shane, do you want to walk us through next then about the Windows Working Group? What have been some of the goals of the Windows Working Group and currently what the team is working on, and your next set of plans?
Yeah, so when we met with our initial meeting, we came up with a few projects that we kind of wanted to focus on. We wanted to focus on getting an MSI installer for SALT, and that was probably our biggest one, and we've probably spent most of our time working on that. Marcus, one of our community members, has been working with Joe, and they've been getting a lot of progress done on that. We're trying to make The MSI installer have all the features as the NullSoft installer. And that'll be good. It'll allow a lot more options for automating, pushing out Salt on enterprise Windows with Active Directory and with other tools, so that it's something that Windows people are used to saying when they want to install something. Another thing we've been working on, we want to get in for next major release is going to Python 3.6 or 3.7. We need to do some initial investigation work to see the package compatibility for Windows on those versions of Python. So as we've upgraded to newer versions of Python in the past, some of our dependencies aren't necessarily supporting those newer versions on Windows. So some work needs to be done around that. We also had a new module that we've written for being able to read the event log out of Windows. It's the event log viewer module, and it's a rough draft, and there still needs to be some improvement done on it, but you can read event logs on Windows now with the module. And lastly, we want to be able to create a service from a state. I mean, we can do everything with services from states except create a new service. So that's a pretty specific feature we'd like to add to the service state module for Windows. So those are the 4 things that we're going to be focusing on in the Windows work group.
Are there any questions for Shane? And also do let us know if there is any feedback for the Windows and Mac working group, since we have the captains of that working group joining us, or any item that you'd want to see that the working group takes up next. This is your chance to give the feedback directly to the captains. So Wesley, do you want to take the stage next?
Oh, I suppose so.
Awesome.
Hi, everyone. I'm Wes, the current captain of the macOS working group. And primarily what we've been working on recently is making sure that everything in Salt actually works on macOS Catalina. As you know, that's the new OS. Apple announced it, oh man, was that in June or something like that? I think we're in beta 7 now, which means a full release is probably due in a couple of weeks. The first thing we ran into was in the 2019 version of Salt, we included a library that allows Python to hit native Objective-C libraries. So we have a bunch of community modules around hitting core components of macOS without like shelling out. It's really awesome. Like, things are super quick. The only problem that we noticed is whenever you start doing multiple process threads off of launch D, and then you try and hit those native APIs, Apple basically just gives that thread a big middle finger and just kills the entire tree, which therefore like goes back and kills the minion, which is not so much fun. But we found a pretty much zero code change fix for it, which is basically don't do multiprocessing if you want to use PyObjective-C. So that's working pretty well right now. I think there's a pull request or 2 open to fix the software update module for Catalina. They did some changes there. And we're presently working on, we found a few inconsistencies and bugs with some of the service stuff for macOS. And that'll be a decent little rewrite, but nothing we can't handle. But yeah, I think outside of that, everyone who's pretty much focusing on macOS is also focusing on all the other tools that we have for Catalina. So everyone's been a little bit slow, but I think once the version is officially out, we'll be able to get some more stuff done with some of the more community modules, getting them actually into the core code. So, but yeah, it's a state of macOS at the moment. Feel free to jump into the macOS channel if you have opinions, comments, concerns, all that fun stuff. So thanks.
We had another question come in from Damon. It says CentOS 5, Python 3 to use with normal salt minion install using 0MQ. I think it's still referring to your previous question.
Wait, e.g. CentOS 5 Python 3 to use with normal salt install using 0MQ. Oh, I think he's asking if our portable Python, our portable version of Python 3 would be able to work with CentOS 5 using 0MQ. So one of the, I mean, one of the tricky things that we run into with portable builds is how often they need to be compiled against the actual running system. The problem that we run into here is because the version of Python is compiled against system libraries. And so if you've got a version of Python that is running in a completely standalone sense, the fact that a built-in and compiled 0MQ should still be able to run on CentOS 5. So that, and still with a portable Python 3. Now with that said, CentOS 5 and RHEL 5 is no longer being maintained. I'm not entirely sure that it would make sense for us to go through the cycles to begin testing salt against CentOS 5 in that way again. Again, because Red Hat is no longer maintaining RHEL 5. But yeah, I mean, it should work. I mean, that's how like computers work. So we should be okay. Sorry, did that interrupt anybody?
I think Wes was done.
Wes, were you done?
Yeah, I'm done unless anybody has any questions.
Okay, sorry about that.
Oh, unacceptable, man, unacceptable.
I think in the meanwhile that the questions are coming in, one of the questions related to the working groups that we get often is, can I join the working group now? I think initially when we started the working group, we said that we set a timeline for the applications, and we said beyond that point, the working groups are pretty set. But just because the working groups are new, the word is still getting out, and people also tend to see how fun the working groups meetings are. They'd want to join, and we've been getting requests. So we've made exceptions, and we are letting people join the working groups, both. Even if you'd want to be like a passive listener, you can still, all the meeting group information is out. You can be a passive listener, or even if you'd want to be an active contributor and join officially, it's still doable. Please do get in touch with any of the captains of the working groups, or you can also Slack me. I'm in the SaltStack community Slack channel.
I mean, if we want to rename the Salt macOS working group to like Salt Fun working group, we can do that too. I don't, it's just an idea out there. But no, I actually do have a question for some people that might be in the room that like aren't present during the macOS working group. The minion by default looks like whenever it starts up, it starts all like the minion processes in a nested multi-process. There's an option to disable keep alive, and that's the option that we're going with to like not get so many threads deep in the minion. And I was curious if there was a reason. I'm assuming the reason for creating the minion on like a multi-process is for systems that don't actually have the capability of doing keep alive, like like with systemd or launchd or stuff like that. Can anybody shed some light on that? Or I'm sure it was code that was written years ago and nobody remembers any of this, but.
Wait, I must have missed something. Was it, so sorry, what was the challenge you're running into with systemd and launchd?
Well, so the minion code by default that like starts the minion, it will So you have like the process that is like kicked off by whatever your initial starter is, right? So on Mac OS it would be launchd, and then the minion will start the actual minion program on a multi-process thread. So it'll like create another PID and it'll run everything on there. And you can keep it from doing that by just passing disable keep alive. So that's what we're doing on Mac OS to like keep it running on the parent, because launchd does a pretty good job of like keeping a process alive if something, it'll restart it if something kicks the bucket, right? I didn't know if we were losing something that I was aware of, or like I wasn't aware of, or that's how Windows works. So
no, thanks for asking, and I'm sorry I missed the punchline in there. You're not losing anything. And the reality is, at this point, given the number of systemd systems that are out there, we should almost certainly be running that through systemd. And yeah, that is something that was added a long time ago, in particular to enable, of course, recovering a minion that dies for some reason. At the same time, we don't run into situations of the minion dying as much. I mean, we go into early days of Salt, and there were more instances of things that would cause the minion to die that we were trying to compensate for. And I mean, it's a long story in and of itself. And
sure.
So no, you're not. I wouldn't say that you're losing anything by bypassing that. And for the situation that you're describing, I would argue that you are easily doing the optimal thing by bypassing that.
Okay, cool. Yeah, just I wanted to make sure, because most of the people that are in the Salt macOS working group are running masterless, and I wasn't sure if like there was something in there with connecting to a master, but everything seems to work fine. It works quite well actually on macOS Catalina, so everyone's happy about how things are looking. But thank you.
I think next question is from Nick. I have a general question. Any updates or comments you could give relating to Umbra or PyTest Salt? He's referring to the PRs associated, or rather the GitHub repos connected with these two. Tom, do you want to talk about Umbra?
Oh, I'm so not prepared for that. Any updates or comments you can give relating to Umbra? Umbra's out there. To be honest, I haven't done a ton of work on it lately. I mean, most of the recent changes have just been to fix it to work with some of the changes that I made in POP 7. Since POP is still kind of young, I'm still willing to make the occasional breaking change. Yeah, I mean, let's see. My goal is that we have Heis and Umbra with some better documentation and some more use cases ready to go for a bigger presentation of what they are at SaltConf. Again, right now, Umbra is really focused on anomaly detection inside of the event bus. But yeah, I don't have a ton of updates there because I've been very heads down on Heis.
Okay. I do see Pedro online. Pedro, do you want to talk about PyTest?
Sure. Although the link to PyTest Salt makes it kind of dubious if it's Salt running under PyTest or if it's the PyTest Salt package/project. I will assume that it's Salt moving to PyTest. There has been changes with Salt moving to PyTest. Those changes are in the Neon branch. That's just the tipping point of the changes that we want to introduce when we switch to PyTest. There's an open pull request which touches something that we want to try out next, which is functional testing versus integration testing, and which should speed up the test suite a fair chunk. To sum the changes, it's still early. The switch to PyTest, close to 99% is still tests written for unit test 2 and not PyTest. So the power that PyTest gives us is not unleashed. We don't have plans to migrate the full test suite to PyTest. That's a massive undertaking. We have plans to go through the tests, see which tests are still valid, which tests are not valid, and if we would gain anything migrating the test to PyTest. We are going to switch to using the PyTest kind of tests for Neon. We still have an issue with the running, well, not PyTest on Windows, but the test suite. We have some abnormal memory consumption on Windows. PyTest escalates the problem because PyTest maintains the results until it finishes. And on Neon, we have more than 10,000 tests. And so the results are all kept in memory. And while we don't address the fact that under PyTest, Windows, at least a couple of months ago, did not finish, we will not fully switch to PyTest. And that's why we don't have code yet to say stop using runtests.py. But that's more or less where we are with regards to PyTest in Salt.
Nick, did that answer your question, or let us know if there's any follow-up? Okay, Nick says thanks. So I think the next question is kind of on the top of everyone's mind. It's from Kirill, who asked any updates on 2019-1 release. I can speak to that, Kirill. So the team has been working on that, and at this point, I think we have, with a very good confidence level, we can say that the release will be out in the 3rd week of September or on the 4th week. We are very close to tagging the release, and we have few steps that we will finish, and it should be out soon in the 3rd or the 4th week of September. Do we have any other questions to the Salt core team or the captains of the working group? Nick has a question to Pedro. Pedro, do you want to take that up?
Sure. So yes, it's an established use case. We wanna. So one of the main goals for us to switch to PyTest, besides it being super powerful, is that it will release some constraints that we have when we run our test suite, and in a little bit further down the road, it should become much more simple to run Salt test suite. And to your question, it should make it way simpler to test your own custom module, custom states. And so that's also one of the goals with PyTest. We are not there yet, meaning it's still not as simple as a simple CLI command, but we are heading towards that direction. Oh, I saw your next paragraph to the validation pipeline. If you're talking about does the state work or not, yes, we will be able to achieve that. If you want to validate the data that is returned, we haven't done anything with that regard.
So Pedro, sorry, because the video, when we put up the video recording, they won't be able to see the chat. Do you want to read out the question?
Okay, so the full question is, Pedro, is using PyTest for state orchestration validation an established use case? And the next paragraph is, as our set of salt policy grows in scope and complexity, we're always looking for support tools that help a validation pipeline. So the end goal will be, yes, if you have a supermassive state tree, you will get to run and validate that it all checks out just fine and runs just fine. I've been toying with something that PyTest enables us to do, which is when we want to make sure that a state run succeeded, we probably don't want to compare the full dictionary of the state run, although we want to compare a few of their keys. So result, the changes, comments, etc. And so while introducing functional testing, I've been toying with kind of like a matching, but not the whole thing. So we can match a state run and match if a comment is a match, match the order of the state run, stuff like that, without having to compare the full dictionary. Of course, once this goes in, there will necessarily be added documentation to explain how this matching happens, so that it's less magical and can be actually useful and reduce the amount of code that people run to test stuff. Hope this answers your question.
Do we have any other questions? You can type in your questions on the Zoom chat.
You're welcome, Nick.
I think looks like that's it. Thank you everyone who were able to join today, asked amazing questions, and also thanks Tom, Shane, Wesley, and Pedro for doing the demos and answering the questions. We will be uploading the video recording to YouTube soon. And as you might be aware, we do these office hours every month on the first Tuesday of the month. So do join us in our next office hours as well. Thank you.